Well, Kirby, I was actually raised in the mobile home business or manufactured housing business. My dad, Wallace Connor, he actually had the largest company in the nation retailing mobile homes, trailers, manufactured homes, whatever you want to call them. And the industry fell out of favor with Wall Street, so the financing of the for the product for the consumer actually went away. So I knew that if I ever got out of manufactured housing, I wanted to get into single family houses. And I've done other deals as well, condominium developments, shopping center, et cetera. But the focus has been single family houses. Well, here's the interesting thing, Kirby. From 2003 until January of 2009, I relied on the local bank to fund our real estate deals. That's all I knew to do. All I knew to do was go to the bank, get on your hands and knees, put your hands underneath your chin and say, please fund my deal. Please fund my deal. And so, I begged and chased and, persuaded and sold and did all that stuff for 6 years. And in January 2009, I called up my banker and it was a very short conversation. I'd done many deals with this banker over the years, but I called him up. I told him about two houses that we had under contract that represented over $100,000 in profit that I was going to get on these two houses. And I learned they had closed my line of credit. And my banker's name was Steve at the time. I said, Steve, what do you mean you've closed my line of credit? What in the world's going on? We've had a great relationship here for 6 years. He says, Jay, don't you know there's a global financial crisis going on right now? And I said, no, but now you've given me a financial crisis because I don't have a way to fund these two deals. So I hung up the phone. And I tell you, Kirby, here's a big takeaway and a writer downer from this story. I sat here and, I had a choice. I could have quit or I did what I did. And that is, I asked myself a very, very important question. I asked myself, who can help me with my problem? Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy wrote a book not too long ago called Who Not How. Mm-hmm. And I asked myself that question. Who can help me with my problem? And you know what? These people going around saying, oh, every problem's an opportunity. I wanted to throw up. I didn't have no opportunity. I had a problem. And so I immediately thought of my good friend Jeff, who lived in Greensboro, North Carolina at the time. And I called him up and I told him what had happened, losing my line of credit at the bank. He said, well, welcome to the club, Jay. He said, I lost my line of credit last week. I said, well, what are you going to do to fund your deals? And he said, have you heard of private money? Have you heard of self-directed IRAs? And I hadn't. I'd never heard of that. Well, I studied private money and self-directed IRAs and how that works and how people can take existing retirement funds and move them over to a self-directed IRA company, tax free. I mean, no penalties, no tax effect. And in less than 90 days, Kirby, I was able to attract, without asking anybody for money, I was able to attract and raise $2,150,000 in new funding from individuals. And you know what's interesting, Kirby? I didn't ask anybody for money. I've yet to ask anybody for money. And people tell me all the time, they say, Jay, how in the world have you got $8.5 million in private money available to you and you don't ask? I said, well, the traditional way to borrow money is you go to the bank and plead and ask and you apply and show you tax returns and all that. I said, but in this world, we're not asking for money. What do? We put on what I call our private money teacher hat, the private money teacher hat. And we simply teach people what private money is, how they can earn high rates of return safely and securely. Now I'm talking about with people that you've got a relationship with. There's two other categories where you can find private money, but I'm talking about when you're going to be raising private money through people you've already got a relationship with. I don't pitch a deal. I've never pitched a deal in my life. We separate the conversation of teaching our private lending program, which is the interest rate they can earn, how they're protected, how they can get their money back in case of an emergency. So first we just share the private lending program with them is how they can earn those kinds of rates of return. If they've got retirement funds, we'll introduce them to our self-directed IRA company that we recommend. And so then when we got a deal to fund, We call them up with the good news phone call. I don't call them up and pitch the deal and say, hey, you want to do this deal? That's the most stupid question in the world I could ask. Of course they want to do the deal. They've been waiting for the good news phone call. I told them I'd put their money to work for them just as soon as possible. And if they have moved current retirement funds over to a self-directed IRA company, they're not earning any money until I do put their money to work for them. So I call them up and I only tell them 4 things. I got great news. I can now put your money to work. Got a house in Newport. They could care less what the physical address is. Got a house in Newport with an after repaired value of $200,000. The funding required is $150,000. I know they got $150,000. They already told me, right? And I said the closing is next Wednesday. You'll need to have your funds wired to my real estate attorney by next Tuesday. End of conversation. It's all about separating, teaching them first what to expect, and then give them a good news phone call.
I love that. I love that. So I guess there's so many different things that you mentioned that I'm curious about, but to start with, what does that education process look like? Like if somebody has a deal right now, they feel like, I need private money. I don't feel like I know anyone that's, you said you didn't pitch anyone, just within 90 days, you had over $2 million. How did that happen? Like tactically, what are the steps to teach someone to be in that position to give you or lend you the funding once you need it?
Sure. Well, one thing as far as how do we educate people, one thing I did is I put on what we call a private lender luncheon. I'm sure you've heard of those as well, Kirby. And so I reserved space at the Dunes Club. So I like to have these luncheons at the nicest place I can. Reserved them, fed everybody lunch, and 30 minutes into the luncheon, I then pull up my PowerPoint presentation and I teach how they can earn high rates of return safely and securely, either by using investment capital and or retirement funds. So in this PowerPoint presentation, I teach them what is a private lender. I teach them, the interest rate I'm going to pay them. I teach them how they can get their money back in case of an emergency. And so that takes about 20 minutes to go through the PowerPoint. Well, just one of those luncheons, I got $969,000
Wow.
just from that one luncheon alone. So that's leveraging your time. But another thing that I did, and I still do it to this day, is I recorded a 16-minute audio. And this 16-minute, now that was back in the day when we had CDs, right? I don't do CDs anymore. But I recorded this 16-minute audio. We now have it on an MP3, right? And also on the website. And so I would simply just share this 16-minute audio to people that I have on my email list. They're in my cell phone. I go to church with them, et cetera. And the purpose of this audio is not to pitch or sell people on your private lending program and what you're offering. It's to introduce them to this world of private money that would then lead to say a one-on-one or going and meeting somebody for coffee and talking about, this program that you've got. I'll tell you another place where I got a lot of private money very, very quickly. So here's another writer downer. Join BNI. Mm-hmm. BNI stands for Business Networking International. Now you talk about growing your warm market, growing your hot market like really, really fast. Well, BNI is different than Rotary. So BNI is an organization that's in the business to where when you join, you're actually giving your fellow members leads of potential prospects for them to use. So it's like having 20 or 30 salespeople on your force, spreading the word about what it is that you're doing. So there's 3 categories where you find these people: your own connections, your expanded warm market. BNI is a great way to do that. And then there's existing private lenders. How do you find individuals that are already loaning money out? Well, I hired my real estate attorney's paralegal back then and to search for public records of individuals that were loaning money out on real estate secured by a deed of trust. It's a deed of trust here in North Carolina. Most people call it a mortgage. And so we only found 2 people in 90 days, because I'm here in a small area. So we actually then started what we call the private lender data feed that we update every month. And now we go out nationwide. And in my membership, we go out nationwide and search and get that updated every month. And you get contact information of these existing private lenders and et cetera, the kind of interest rates they get and their contact info.
Interesting. And so when you start educating them, what type of terms do you typically discuss in that education process that you would potentially offer?
Sure. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I have been paying the same exact thing since 2009, and I pay them all the same. Now, prior to COVID, a 12-month CD actually at the local bank actually got down to paying only 0.25%.
Yeah.
Well, today you can get 5 or 5.5% in a 12-month CD. But you know what? I've been paying my private lenders the same thing all this time, 8%, no origination fees, no extension fees, no points, no junk fees, a straight 8%. Now that's on my private lenders that are in first position that we use for purchasing a property. Some private lenders, and by the way, I got 47, and you don't need 47 to start out. You just need 1 or 2 to start. But some private lenders, some individuals only have, a smaller amount of money, maybe only $50,000. When I started out, my minimum that I would accept was $30,000. Well, I can't buy a house typically with that amount of money, but I can use that amount of money for rehabbing a property. And so I'll put them in second position, also known as a junior lien position, and I will pay those people 10% instead of 8%. And of course, they're not loaning this money to me unsecured. We're securing all the notes by the property. We also named the private lender on the insurance policy, the property and casualty insurance policy on that property, as the mortgagee. Well, that gives them another layer of protection. If you go borrow money from the bank on your house, the bank's going to be named as the mortgagee, which protects the lender. And we name them on the title policy as well as an additional insured. So we never borrow unsecured money. All these notes are backed by the real estate that we're investing in. And private money, there's no hurry to pay it back. I mean, with the way rents have gone in recent times, depending on how much you pay for a property, you could use the private money on your rentals, right? And then once you get that seasoned, that way you can close quickly. That's another big advantage to using private money. And there's no limit to the number of private lenders you can have. And there's no limit to the amount of private money you can borrow. But you can use it to close it if it needs some rehabbing to get it ready to go. And then if you are renting it out, then you can refinance that conventionally, pay off the private lender, and use their money over and over again on additional projects.